Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we meet today at a very important juncture for Libya. The political roadmap announced by the United Nations Support Mission in Libya in August offers renewed hope following years of political stalemate. It provides a viable path towards national elections, unified institutions, and structured dialogue, all of them essential to deliver on the Libyan people's aspirations for justice and sustainable peace. At the same time, Libya's transition is challenged by a long and continuing legacy of serious human rights violations and abuses. Regrettably, civic space continues to come under sustained attack, with perceived political opponents, journalists, and civil society systematically targeted as a means of stifling dissent. And yet, the meaningful participation of all these groups and of women, youth, minorities, people with disabilities, and victims and survivors of human rights violations and abuses is essential for an inclusive national dialogue that moves Libya onwards from the status quo that is favored by some parties. Technical cooperation is a critical element in supporting the Libyan authorities to promote and protect human rights and to establish the foundations for accountability, as well as a rights-based transition under the political roadmap. The report before you outlines the capacity-building activities carried out by our office in close cooperation with the UN Support Mission in Libya. During the reporting period, we expanded the substantive and geographical scope of our activities, including through cooperation with the Eastern authorities. We brought together Libyan stakeholders from the east and west of Libya to reach an agreement on the legislative framework for a national transitional justice and reconciliation process, as well as on a law on prevention of violence against women. Despite these positive steps, our office remains concerned that key legislative reforms continue to be undermined by political fragmentation and the lack of institutional commitment. Our office also conducted specialized training for judges and prosecutors on international human rights standards and mechanisms, criminal justice principles, and fair trial guarantees. Our goal is to address systematic violations of fair trial and due process guarantees. We also trained prison officials through about 15 workshops conducted across the country with the aim of improving detention conditions and bringing the treatment of detainees in line with international standards. We undertook monitoring visits to detention facilities, in some cases alongside Libya's National Human Rights Institution, the National Council for Civil Liberties and Human Rights. This is part of our efforts to strengthen the Council's capacity for monitoring and documentation. We also supported the Libyan authorities in their efforts to establish a committee to monitor detention conditions. And while the authorities expressed their openness to technical cooperation, our efforts continue in this domain to be undermined by the denial of full, unhindered access to all detention facilities and locations. Your Excellencies, the report before you also offers insights into the human rights situation since April 2024 and calls for sustained technical assistance to Libya. It highlights a persistent pattern of arbitrary arrests and detentions, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances, all perpetrated with impunity. Between March 2024 and September 2025, our office verified the deaths of 20 individuals in custody, many of whom were deemed to be political opponents. The Libyan authorities remain either unwilling or unable to bring perpetrators of atrocity crimes to justice. Piecemeal action and opportunistic prosecutions cannot address Libya's accountability deficit. More than a year after the publication of our joint report on mass graves and gross human rights violations in Tarhuna, little credible progress has been made by Libyan authorities to hold alleged perpetrators to account. Meanwhile, migrants and refugees continue to face brutal and systematic human rights violations. Human traffickers, armed groups, and state security personnel prey on their vulnerabilities and engage in an exploitative business model, profiting from extortion, slavery, sexual exploitation, and forced labor, emboldened by a climate of impunity and indifference. Madam Vice President, Your Excellencies, I wish to recall the shocking revelations of mass graves, torture, and other gross human rights violations at detention facilities run by state security forces in Tripoli earlier this year. We welcome the subsequent commitment by the Libyan authorities to engage in meaningful reform of the security sector in line with Libya's human rights obligations. Another positive development is the release on 8 July of this year of several people who had been arbitrarily detained, some for up to 8 years. This came after the sustained engagement of our office with that of the Attorney General. Our office also welcomes the declaration by the government accepting the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court with respect to alleged crimes in its territory from 2011 to the end of 2027. This is a very important step towards accountability. But it needs to be followed by concrete action. First, it is crucial that the Libyan authorities cooperate fully with the court on the execution of outstanding arrest warrants and on granting unrestricted access to sites under investigation. Second, member states must support the court's efforts by surrendering suspects to it and themselves making full use of the principle of universal jurisdiction in accordance with international law. Madam Vice President, our message is unequivocal. Any sustainable political settlement for Libya must be anchored in justice and human rights. It must address the root causes of the conflict and the governance deficit and build legitimate institutions. Our office remains committed to extending its full support to the Libyan authorities and the people of Libya through this transition with international human rights norms and standards as our guiding principle. Libya's Universal Periodic Review in November will be an opportunity to continue the dialogue on improving the country's human rights situation. At this important juncture, I call on all Libyan actors and the member states to rise to the moment by offering their full backing and concrete support to each pillar of the political roadmap. Despite the enormous challenges ahead, it is time to grapple with the human toll of decades of violence and violations and abuses and to restore hope and human rights to the Libyan people. Thank you.